A very good evening and welcome to today's event of the Ruperto Carola lecture series Freedom, ? The University as a Space for Discourse. I'd like to welcome you to our first event of the year with Professor Sahana Udupa, media anthropologist from Ludwig Maximilians University, Munich. My name is Christiane Brosius, and together with Barbara Mittler and the Communication and Marketing Department here at the Rectorat, we have organized this lecture series, and we're very excited that we have the opportunity of listening to Sahana Udupa today. Well, actually, Sahana Udupa's presence here today could not be more timely, and we are very grateful that you have accepted the invitation when we reached out last summer and you suggested the title Freedom and Unfreedom of Social Media. The topic of freedom of speech and social media is probably one of the future challenges. Well, and we are right there in the middle of a turbulence, especially since Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg have issued worrisome statements about their definition of freedom and fact-checking and censorship, diversity and justice, and what they think is a bias. Sahana Udupa is one of the leading international experts in the context of digital politics, politics of artificial intelligence, global digital cultures, online extreme speech and hate speech, urban politics, and viral videos. Her lecture will focus on the consequences of 2 decades of social media expansion, which has recently experienced a renewed technological boost due to communicative artificial intelligence. The opportunities opened by technology have created new freedoms, but at the same time, they have also contributed to establishing new forms of unfreedom, undermining divergent opinions and feeding anxieties. This crisis is not due to digital communication alone, argues our speaker. It is also fostered by a global conjuncture of enduring coloniality and novel ways of organizing political activity. The tensions addressed in the relationship of freedom and unfreedom goes beyond freedom of speech and, of course, impacts questions of academic freedom and communication, relations, exchanges, and understanding of truth-making regimes and strategies. As of last Friday, Heidelberg University is discontinuing communication activities on its central X account. In doing so, it is part of an initiative in the German-speaking region of over 60 universities and research institutions who will stop using the platform. This withdrawal comes, I quote, in response to the platform's current direction, which is incompatible with the core values of the participating institutions: openness to the world, scientific integrity, transparency, and democratic discourse, quote, end, says the press release issued by this initiative. So far, our speakers and audience have not focused and discussed much on social media, but we've explored the complex relationship between academic freedom and freedom of opinion from various angles, revealing tensions in this space. Legal scholar Eckhard Reimer from this university emphasized that the university is not a marketplace for opinions, but a forum for rigorous scientific debate, testing, verifying, contextualizing ideas transparently from a rigorous scientific position. If we accept that research thrives on diversity and critical debate, universities truly play a very key role in fostering this dialogue. However, such a forum requires participants to step outside their comfort zones and engage with new perspectives and with complexity and ambiguities. As Sabah Nurshima and Meron Mendel discussed, consensus is not always the goal. Sometimes we must tolerate, even if not always agree, with opposing views. A healthy discourse space like a university needs both intellectual and institutional support, especially as contemporary polarizations challenge our principles and values. Biao Xiang from the Max Planck Institute for Social Anthropology in Halle discussed the university's role in navigating academic freedom amidst geopolitical tensions. Eva Illus, in her lecture, highlighted the need for self-reflection on how emotional and normative biases, particularly in identity politics, shape academic debates, as seen in the Middle East conflict. The role of universities also raises questions about access, equality, and diversity. Are they gatekeepers or access facilitators? How can we balance inclusion and multi-perspectivity with avoiding enforced conformity? Economist Christiane Schwieren from Heidelberg posed the challenge of maintaining a university's multi-perspectivity without fragmenting it into isolated islands. And this brings us back to today's speaker. Sahana Udupa is professor of media anthropology at LMU Munich and founder of the Center for Digital Dignity, an international network that brings together researchers, policy experts, and civil society groups to collaboratively imagine enabling spaces of political expression online. She has published widely on extreme speech, disinformation, artificial intelligence, and content moderation, on decoloniality and platform governance. Currently, Sahana Udupa is setting up a new project on contentious speech on small social media platforms in Kenya, Germany, Britain, and India. The project is funded by the European Research Council's Consolidator Grant Award. In 2016, Udupa received the European Research Council's Starting Grant Award for her project on digital media politics. These projects, with a core team of postdoctoral researchers at LMU and a wider international network of scholars, explore the influence of internet-enabled media on political cultures of networked participations, especially extreme forms of speech and their implications. Sahana has been named Berkman Klein Fellow and Joan Shorenstein Fellow at Harvard University. She was inducted as Fellow of the prestigious International Communication Association in 2024 and was awarded the Franke Chair in Belgium in 2021. She received the European Grant Research Council Proof of Concept Award for developing a collaborative artificial intelligence-assisted process model to tackle online extreme speech. In 2021, the United Nations Department of Peace Operations commissioned her to write a research paper on digital technology and extreme speech, which was published as part of the UN Digital Transformation Strategy for Peace Operations. In 2023, the article on artificial intelligence, extreme speech and content moderation she co-authored with Antonis Maronikolakis and Axel Wisiorek won the International Communication Association Outstanding Article Award. Udupa is the author of Making News in Global India, published by Cambridge University Press, co-author of Digital Unsettling, Decoloniality and Dispossession in the Age of Social Media, published by New York University Press. After her talk, Sahana will be in conversation with our colleague Sebastian Harnisch. Sebastian Harnisch is Professor for International Relations and Foreign Policy at the Institute for Political Science at the Faculty of Economic and Social Sciences at Heidelberg University and member of the Executive Board of the Heidelberg Center for American Studies. His main research areas include comparative foreign and security policy, international relations theories, cybersecurity, non-proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, and climate change policy issues. Sebastian holds degrees in history and political science and was a research fellow at the Japan Center for International Exchange in Tokyo, at Columbia University or Yonsei University in Seoul. He taught at the Federal Armed Forces University in Munich and was visiting professor at Beijing Foreign Studies University, among others. He also teaches diplomacy at the Academy of the Federal Foreign Office in Berlin. My colleague is member of the Scientific Advisory Board of the Foreign Policy Analysis Journal, the Oxford Research Encyclopedia for Foreign Policy Analysis, and other renowned peer-reviewed journals. What is, I think, particularly relevant for today, and before I close to then open the floor for Sahana Udupa, is that Sebastian is also project coordinator of the European Interdisciplinary Research Consortium, www.EuroPOC.eu, which tracks, assesses, and evaluates malicious cyber incidents worldwide and respective policy responses by EU member states. This European repositorium on cyber incidents uses a modular AI-based data pipeline, scraping a broad variety of news and industry sources, including social media statements, to inform decision makers, social stakeholders, and interested citizens. Please welcome Sahana Udupa with me. We are very happy to have you, and the floor, as I said, is yours.
Okay. Thank you so much for this generous introduction, Professor Christiana Brosius, for your warm invitation, Professor Barbara Mittler, and also Professor Sebastian Harnisch for being a dialogue partner today. So as social media networks and their owners become powerful power brokers for different elections and political contexts around the world, I stand before you today to share some thoughts on why and how we should take social media seriously in this current moment of turmoil and how it is affecting the academia. The reality of digital disinformation and extreme speech today has reminded us yet again that the initial euphoria around internet-enabled communication as harbingers of peer-to-peer communication, participatory equities in democratic societies, and also the much anticipated liberation technology is now eclipsed. And now that initial euphoria is eclipsed by the reality of digital disinformation and extreme speech. And today I'm going to get into the details of certain episodes and also certain phenomena, and then also get into some general analytical points about social media. So I'll be using some blank slides here, so don't get confused. The computer will still be working. It is for you to take your eyes off the PPT sometimes. So let me begin with an incident. On one of those fieldwork days, I saw a flurry of activities on the timeline of a Twitter account, which belonged to a female academic of South Asian origin employed at a prestigious UK university. It was called Twitter at that time. Now it's called X, as we know. And the slew of tweets on this timeline had the characteristics of trolling, which is persistent provocation through linguistic aggression, which had continued from the days of Usenet groups and transmutated into a dynamic category, a user category with ambivalent energies. And this academic is a staunch critique of white supremacist rhetoric and ideology, and very recently she had challenged a pro-Brexiter who was also a novelist. And we did a systematic thematic analysis of this troll episode. And during this analysis, I came across some important and disturbing expressions. There were accusations of reverse racism. She was accused of being a racist. There were terms like race baiter, who is supposed to be playing the race card, or minority super status for self-aggrandizing career moves or for covering intellectual incapacity with a signboard of victimhood. There were also other terms, race huckster, race grifter. And this resentment extended beyond this particular academic because, for the most part, these tweets represented a deep discomfort for what online commentators believed she represented: a left progressive constellation comprising universities, organized media, and political parties, anti-Brexit in this case. A significant 18% of the tweet themes that we mapped belonged to a category that we labeled academia, education, press. And they had different labels: leftist, globalist, multiculturalist, far right, utterly possessed by ideology, spiteful, narcissistic, hooligans who just want kiosk, people with little self-awareness, Stalinist. And also, there was the claim that universities are becoming more and more inconsequential. And here is a visualization of different themes that appeared. In June 2024, former research director of the Stanford Internet Observatory revealed that their team was being harassed online by far-right groups, and they were spreading rumors that their work was a plot to censor the right. A recent study based on a survey of 2,600 scientists in Germany carried out by the German Center for Higher Education Research and Science Studies and the Alexander von Humboldt Institute for Internet and Gesellschaft. It says, hostility towards researchers is a serious problem affecting the academic community, end quote. In our work, we define these forms as speech acts that stretch the boundaries of legitimate speech along the twin axes of truth, falsity, and civility and incivility. They can be subversive or repressive based on the context, but today I'll be focusing on discourses which could be termed as right-wing ideologies, and these are discourses aimed against minoritized and historically vulnerable communities by way of invoking nationalist feelings or populist logics or an articulation between them in drawing connections between the vertical axis of up-down, which is the populist axis, and the nationalist axis, which is the in-out axis, horizontal axis, to claim social citizenship rights on a non-equitable basis, and connectedly also eroding spaces of dignity in cultural symbolic terms for groups and individuals targeted by this discourse. And I will get into this contaminated world of words using 3 different gateways or entry points. I will look into affordances of platforms which are quasi-public social media platforms like Twitter and X, and also encrypted messaging services like WhatsApp, and then talk about political consultancy work and disinformation for hire workers in India and Brazil, and anti-immigrant discourse in Germany, teasing out from each of these empirical gateways a theoretical point about affordance and practices, commerce, and ideology. Defining this as a global conjuncture, I will end my talk with some reflections on how it is affecting the academia. There is also geopolitical dynamic at work here, what Lanz and Bennett and Stephen Livingston define as disinformation order. It's not information disorder, but disinformation order. It's organized, it's part of geopolitical conflicts, and this is beyond the scope of my work today. So going back to the trolling episode, it was interesting for us to see the tone of exchange. Comments against the academic had a very thick tone of sarcasm. It was laced with in-jokes, boisterous shaming, name-calling, put-downs, aphorisms, and sobriquets that displayed familiarity with digitally native jargons. They knew how to trend. And there was also rhythmic flourish. For instance, race baiting with clickbaiting, and so on. One tweeter, for instance, remarked, "I'm surprised the BBC haven't given her a job on woke comedy panel shows." One other drew a drab comparison with vegans. Probably she's a vegan, they're miserable. Restless to frame the ongoing deluge of tweets as British humor, another tweet remarked, "Too bad when her ancestors were colonized, they didn't get any British humor," end quote. And there were high fives, metaphorically speaking, and there was display of online muscle power. Enjoying your post, applauded a tweeter, followed by emojis of faces with tears of joy and thumbs up. I think your forensic takedown of hucksterism is hitting the target. Keep up the good work, cheered another commentator. So through this episode, we understand that there are distinct online cultures at work. And I've defined this as fun as a meta practice of extreme speech. It has at least 4 different interrelated dimensions. Being funny as a tactical way to enter and rise to prominence within online debates, and by extension, the broader public domain. Deriving fun from the sheer freshness of colloquialism in political debates, which is different from the official centricity and serious tone of political deliberation, and by mainstreaming witty campaign styles as an everyday form of political communication. Fun as satisfaction of achieving a goal by working with one's own resources and in finding tangible results such as hashtag trending, virality, and perceived real-world changes. And fun as group identification and collective, if at times anonymous, celebration of aggression. So if on Twitter, these affordances offer visible and even spectacular publicity, transforming trolling into a performance of abuse and aggression, spurred on by the publicity scores, the number of likes you get, the number of retweets you get, and so on. And this also gives them the promise of disrupting mainstream media and political discourses. And there is the satisfaction of doing this and gaining traction. And these are some of the affordances of quasi-social media platforms. But encrypted messaging, like WhatsApp, offers a different set of possibilities. WhatsApp is hugely popular, as you know, especially in the global south. I took a picture from the fieldwork. This shows there are about 863 unread messages on my interlocutor's phone. I was surprised. That's the hectic pace of digital engagement. WhatsApp is so huge with 2.2 billion monthly users worldwide, 100 billion daily messaging world over. It's often even seen as technology of life, as Crux and Harindranath define. And there are certain distinct features here, end-to-end encryption, definitely, and message ephemerality through disappearing messages, closed chat architectures. But we see that in each of these features, there are contradictions. For instance, the promised privacy and encrypted security can be completely overturned by repressive states when state actors seize mobile phones from suspected dissenters and download the data or inspect the data. So it does not require any sophisticated technology to upturn encryption, but this is a brute act of repression. And similarly, we talk about closed chat architecture, but many a times these WhatsApp groups are used as broadcast channels, and WhatsApp has also introduced some of these new features. So there are contradictions at every level of these affordances. But what I find interesting is how WhatsApp taps social trust and cultural capital at community levels, often making deep inroads into the intimate sphere of families, kin networks, neighbors, caste-based networks, ethnic groups, and other long-standing social allegiances. I define this as deep extreme speech. And by centering community allegiances in the distribution logics, these forms have placed extreme speech at the confluence of affect and obligation. And when it comes to emotion and effects, fun is quite similar. We see that happening on Twitter as well. But obligation is a very important feature of this kind of communication, because the moment you receive something from your kin groups or kin-like groups, from your uncles and your sweet auntie somewhere there, you are unlikely to protest, unlikely to not see that. And therefore, users feel the need to share and respond to the messages they receive because of these obligatory ties, and any form of inaction on received content conflicts with a sense of obligatory ties and reciprocity that define these socially thick networks of deep extreme speech. In fact, in such circulatory milieus, responsible action is itself conceived as circulation, the sense that by forwarding the messages, one has done one's duty. And therefore, by this confluence of affect and obligation, deep extreme speech forms de-link hateful expressions and rumors from the impersonal constructions of truthfulness or moral constructions of hatred. In other words, when messages are embedded within personalized, trust-based networks, what ensues is not as much a problem of truth, whether it is true or false, or the problem of morality, whether it is good or bad, but an emotional or obligatory urge to share them and be in it, if not with the flow. And these very affordances and different participatory possibilities of social media are today being systematically harnessed by a new sector which is called political marketing or disinformation for hire services. And this is the second window in our analysis. Studies have shown that these so-called professional marketeers have expanded around the world. They are involved in profiling voters, micro-targeting. They are also very sophisticated now in what is defined as data-centric campaigning. They even have words like persuadable, so they will go and map each constituency and also think about who are the voters who are undecided and how can we persuade them. And they crunch the data, they gather the data in a very intense manner. And they're also shown to be involved in cross-media manipulation, engineering trends across different media, and also offering clickbait services. One exemplary case, of course, comes from Elon Musk's sponsorship of campaign activities in the swing states of Pennsylvania and Michigan during the recent US presidential elections. New York Times tells us that he almost single-handedly funded an effort that cost more than $175 million, and his canvassers knocked on close to 11 million doors in presidential battleground states. And we see here that the conventional field operations of political parties, campaign activities, are today bolstered by commercial and wealthy campaigners. And such activities complemented Musk's continuous peddling of conspiracy theories on his X platform. The Brazilian and Indian cases that I have closely examined contribute to the observation that extreme speech production is intricately linked to the expanding logics of political marketing. Commercial political consultancy using digital tools is a vastly variegated field. There are big players and also small entrepreneurs who are doing it to earn a livelihood. Star strategists have amassed massive media capital, but below this creamy layer of star strategists, we see many different commercial players who are offering influence enhancement services to interested political parties and individual politicians. This is the vastly dispersed network of informal influencers. Some interlocutors describe this as the unofficial wing of the political party. Remember that this is not external to the political party system. It is the party's internal system that nurtures the so-called social media volunteers and a vast number of third-party pages, unofficial pages, proxy workers, and clickbait amplifiers through an elaborate network of incentives and layered recruitment. One part of the content that flows here is described as positive narratives, for instance, how the government is doing on welfare schemes, etc. But crucially, this unofficial wing is allowed to innovate on content, ramp up provocative language and twisted accounts, and stalk and harass critical voices. And they are now taking up orders for deep fakes. And these two wings, the unofficial and the official wings, coordinate, not directly, but behind opaque lines of communication. It's not through a formal organizational structure. And therefore, I define this as a shadow. The unofficial wing is a shadow because it follows, but it does not have the status of the body. On the one hand, the official-unofficial dual structure of shadow politics once again tells us the importance of informal or gray zones of election mobilization where extreme content and actions are experimented, sponsored, and disseminated. But defining them as a shadow clarifies that these units follow the official unit and are inseparable from it. They are digitally integrated with the mainstream campaign structure. In other words, gray practices and networks and the extreme content produced through them are unofficially sanctioned, elaborately financed through diverse incentives, and are critical to digital influence operations. In Brazil, sometimes it's described as Lado B, the side B. It's not part of the official network, but they're there to troll people to enhance online traffic. Alfonso Albuquerque and colleagues, they also observe that boundaries between institutional and anti-institutional agents have blurred in terms of networks that produce and disseminate disinformation. So, social media affordances and political marketing are key conditions of mediation for extreme speech. But let us remember that online actors are not dubious or mere puppets in the hands of political marketing. The troll attack that I started my talk with, and this deep fake shared by patriotic groups in Germany, are neither fully orchestrated nor determined by platform affordances and political marketing. These actors are ideological warriors who are buoyed by affordances of social media, but crucially, they are historically situated actors enacting their privilege and a sense of grievance. Right-wing ideology as a politics of non-belonging is articulated differently in different contexts of the world. We document some of them in our volumes, but there are important synergies and crossover amplifications. We did some content analysis of online anti-immigrant discourse in Germany, and we see several themes here. Derision of immigrants, of course, because that was our sample, and by which we mean direct derision here in this map. There were racist comments, hyper-nationalist comments, assumption that there is a cultural threat to the nation. There were debates about formal politics. There was anger against the so-called elites, derision of refugees. Some of these themes occurred in many different data sets that we have examined. But I also noticed that there is this very unique theoretical formulation that's gaining momentum. It is ethno-pluralism. And when I was discussing with right-wing volunteers here in Munich, they described ethno-pluralism as something that is holding up the intellectual stamina of this movement. It promotes the view that it is important to ensure the rights of people to live where they belong, since dislocation of all sorts can be traumatizing. They aspire for a social order in which every ethnic group lives in its own culturally homogeneous homeland. And thereby, they extend the pride and anxieties about German culture and identity into a general anti-immigration theory. Far from any direct references to denigration, hate, and exclusion, these theorists present themselves as defenders of difference, authenticity, and socio-cultural security gained within homogeneous societies. So, you do not find direct expressions of hatred here. In fact, there is a clever twist of tropes. The left progressive tropes of dislocation, trauma, authenticity, difference are appropriated in this discourse. And it is loaded with what Zygmunt Bauman describes as retrotopia, visions located in the lost, stolen, abandoned, but undead past. And these kinds of visions exist in the context where sentiments on the ground are becoming more and more complex. In a recent article, Daria Krevonos shows that Eastern European migrants in Western Europe, I'm quoting her, attempt to become more valuable subjects by migrating to what they see as the West, at the same time as they become devalued as de-skilled, low-paid workers. This route to Europeanness is a racialized journey, not only in terms of her interlocutors becoming not fully white subjects, but also through their actively racializing non-white others as not belonging to Europe. End quote. In an upcoming book on the political impact of Germans of immigration background, author and political consultant Özgür Özvatan is quoted in Deutsche Welle very recently, where he observes that people who immigrated earlier are not automatically in favor of immigration. So there are vast complexities on the ground, but against this complexity, online anti-immigrant ideology marches forward, trying to smooth over these contradictions, disassociate these struggles, and neutralize their voices, to use the analytics of Chantal Mouffe. And therefore, we define this as a global conjuncture, and this similar politics of non-belonging is articulated in different parts of the world, and we see the similar play of social media affordances, the rise of political marketing, political consultants, and disinformation for hire workers, and different kinds of ideological formations around articulating exclusion. And by defining this as a global conjuncture of actors, affordances, and ideological practices, I show that social media has provided a connective tissue for this conjuncture. So to sum up the first part of my talk here, this global conjuncture of online extreme speech is first and foremost about new styles and resources to say the unsayable. This is the chest-thumping braggadocio and bare-knuckles approach to speech. And Ostugai, he defines this as the populist style, a low rather than high style that favors raw and crude but warm and unrestrained over refined and cultivated but cool and reserved language and self-presentation. Elon Musk, when he describes democratically elected leaders as tyrants and fools, you see some aspects of this. Angela Nagel, in her book, Kill All Normies, attributes this deliberate border crossing to online subcultural trends and traces the transition of online trolls and 4chan from left anarchic spaces to the alt-right movement. Anthropologist Peter Herwig defines this as ritualized opposition. It is characterized by the use of a distinct, indignant tone, sarcasm, racialized reasoning, the use of high-fis, celebration, and a general indifference to facts. As I mentioned, I define this as fun as a meta-practice of extreme speech. Fun is not frivolity of action, but a serious political activity that consolidates communities of supporters for exclusionary ideologies. In digital environments, fun instigates pleasures of identity that can mitigate risk and culpability for actors. Distance and deniability implied in objectivity and liberal communicative reason based on idealized impersonal norms of discourse are precisely the performative principles for online fun as a meta-practice characterized by collective joking, networked vitriol, and trending. In a curious twist, fun and reason become substitutable in a formal sense. And we met several people, for instance, to give you two examples. One of our interlocutors said that meeting good mensch, this is the derogatory term for progressive people. He said, it's something that just happens, usually in the evening when I'm bored. It's not something I actively do. I don't have a plan. It's more fun. End quote. Another right-wing activist in Germany told us, I'm good at writing what is possible within the frame of the German hate crime law. That's the fun part. If you write something in a way that everybody knows what I mean, but I'm not writing it And that makes them freak out. So this is also fun, that you are evading it, strategically evading it. And therefore, affordances of social media, the different kinds of features, even small social media platforms come up with their own features, including algorithmically mediated content and architectural features, provide distinct possibilities for such ideologies and practices to gain ground and sustain their everyday resonance. And these precise conditions have made social media a site for commercial political consultancy and their monetized narrative work for political actors. For several global South countries, there is no direct say in the development of these global corporate giants, in the algorithmic architecture of social media or their business models. But they have to deal with it because they've now become part of their social fabric. One can probably draw a comparison with the COVID pandemic. Here, imagine dying from an overseas disease when you do not even own a passport. This quote came from Kenyan scholars Job Muwara and Ufauma Akpojivi talking to some of the victims of this disease. And with Mark Zuckerberg withdrawing fact-checking, discontinuing fact-checking operations, a very cynical version of free speech ideology has been imposed upon the world. And this is, again, another assault on responsible speech. I think in important ways, this is a reproduction and continuation of structures of coloniality. And I define coloniality as a global process of three interlinked relations, nation-state relations that define the boundaries of in and out and majority and minority, market relations that append a large part of human activities to the logic of accumulation, and racialized relations that dispose certain people as unworthy. And these relations have evolved together and in close conjunction through history and to this time. I would think that online extreme speech is reproduction of these relationships that coloniality instigated and how they also intersected with regional systems of hierarchies and conflicts that were not invented by colonialism, but they were influenced by colonial power. Academia and the university campus are an important battleground for this extreme speech ecosystem. In the book, Digital Unsettling, co-authored with anthropologist Gabriel Dattatrein, we show how, on the one hand, as we become more comfortable giving Zoom talks and curating our talks on YouTube, like this talk, we potentially extend our audiences beyond those of our institutional spaces. We can think through this shift by using a popular trope in anthropology, the idea of home and field. Field is where you gather data, and home is where you sit, analyze, process, and theorize. And we know that this particular ideology of home and field also means that the further away your field is from your physical home, the more authentic you are as an anthropologist. So at least this was what was believed. The digital as a means of communication and networked potentiality has decoded the distinction between field and home and associated ideas of nearness and distance, now and after, here and there. With the always-on character of digital networks now pervading academic fields, the distinction between home as a space of calm reflection and field is where you discover alterity is no longer tenable. In fact, it is unfamiliar to us now because of the digital networks. there is one critical aspect of this difference between home and field, which is the calm security that home provides you. And in the colonial context, this calm security came from the power and privileges of the imperial home. And one could enter into or exit the field and impose evaluative and analytical perspectives on research subjects because research subjects did not speak back. And in this social media age, this hierarchy is productively upset, and for good reasons in some sense. Our research interlocutors are able to actively engage with our works, leave comments, and even reach out to us on social media networks. And therefore, this dissolving of boundaries and the fact that field is constantly speaking back to you is interesting, but it is suffused with contradictions. On the one hand, it allows researchers to more clearly articulate our ethical and political stakes in the project. We cannot be inaccessible or unaccountable. But at the same time, this interactivity, the temporality, and also self-archiving instigations of social media have brought us the predicament of just-in-time commenting. While academic knowledge is about slow reflection, self-critique, referencing and correction that happen in loops of forward movement and steps that tread back. But from a social movement perspective, this particular temporality and this very archiving possibility have opened up a different possibility. A very good example would be student movements invoking the notion of decolonization. They've blossomed around different campuses in South Africa, UK, North America, and also South Asia. And these multiple evocations of decolonization, as they emerge from different socio-political realities and meet in social media space, they bring into complicated and uneven conversation different struggles for indigenous sovereignty, epistemic justice, material struggles around fees and access into universities, institutional accountability, and a critique of the coloniality of the post-colonial state. And this publicity has brought so much energy to these struggles. But at the same time, this very publicity has also meant that there are organized attacks and intimidation campaigns against progressive and critical academics. And critical scholars today are left with a condition where they have to navigate regressive actors who stalk them, who claim to expose them, attempting to affix researchers in a state of constant alertness and anxiety. We define this state as networked exposure. And some of these forces have gone beyond online games of harassment, attempting to reach the physical halls of decision-making inside the universities. They deride student activism as snowflake politics. And snowflake is a term that comes from a popular Hollywood movie, Fight Club, starring Brad Pitt, and it is a very popular term among misogynists in the online subcultures of manosphere. So, academics have taken upon themselves to defend academic freedoms, but there are also divisive discourses among academic scholars which are partly shaped by the logics of social media's hyperventilation. One example comes from a podcast episode published in 2016, where podcast host Sam Harris interviews marketing professor Gadsad. He's introduced as someone who has pioneered the use of evolutionary psychology in understanding marketing and consumer behavior. But he was invited for this podcast episode because, as the podcast host describes him, he's battling some of the battles against the regressive left. Regressive left in this episode is signposted as postmodernism, moral relativism, identity politics, and all those intellectual and ethical frames that seem to be going in wrong directions, in quotes. During the episode, they also used the term radioactive left. The second example comes from tendencies to see student protests and campus struggles as mere culture wars. A media anthropologist at an e-seminar at European Research Association for Social Anthropologists described decoloniality as a macro-historical mouthful and asked in a published comment, aren't decolonialists and social justice warriors doing the same as right-wing groups, waging culture wars? These strategies of drawing false equivalences and among different ideological groups and gaslighting signal tropes of retrotopia as well as an aspired future for the campus. How should we respond, and what cultures and processes do we need to build? I will share some thoughts from my limited field of work. I would think the university campus as freedom should be the space for agonism, for voices that contest, question, and bring experiences of different communities. Students and scholars coming from migrant, religious minority, working class groups, gender non-conforming students, precarious academic labor. And all these voices should become part of what is seen as legitimate knowledge-making. And we should consider how these subjectivities have evolved over history, how they've come about, how they compound, intersect, and enhance inequalities and disadvantages, to borrow Kimberly Crenshaw's insightful words. For too long, positive science has seen these experiences as mere data points that have to pass through the test of positive verifiability. For too long, the self-perception of calm rationality has prompted liberals in Western universities to not recognize sweeping changes in political style that are hitting their own shores. For too long, they've been swayed by the idea that they are held by the virtue of civility, placing the other as an object of liberal piety. Even more harshly, there is the bureaucratic heavy hand and the tyranny of decontextualized rule-keeping. The churning we see on university campuses is a wake-up call, I would say, to listen to the voices of diverse communities, their lives and labor that have made our country, Germany, what it is today, and how it will evolve in the present in the global world. At the same time, this churning also provides us a bulwark against regressive attacks, organized attacks against critical thinking, which is a feature of the global conjuncture of extreme speech. Academia is about developing safe spaces for open discussion, which comes with a recognition that this openness is not about promoting illiberal views, half-truths, and naked lies. As critical cultural theory intimates, one of the strongest discursive moves is to shift the terms of discourse or terms of debate. So naked lies and half-truths do not compete on grounds of reason, but they attempt to shift the terms of debate, our mind space, and our affective energies. When I was talking with communication scholar Afonso Albuquerque in Brazil, he said when they were being targeted by conservative organizations inside the country, their response was to develop disinformation studies with its own knowledge orthodoxy, as he says. And perhaps one response could be to develop this as a very specific field of study with its own body of methods, with its body of thought, and reviews and recognition systems. And in my mind, 3 points about extreme speech are important in this effort. First, disinformation science, or whatever we wish to call it, is about critical contextual inquiry into the ambiguities and affective pull of extreme speech. It comes with the recognition that online vitriolic speech is not a level playing field of profanities that is distributed equally among different ideological groups, but a volatile arena where the historical violence presses on the present, and current powers, they invest disproportionately, thereby affecting vulnerable communities in very particular ways. And this historically inflected systemic disruption of public speech should be our concern. In other words, the sheer use of vitriol says little about who is affected by this and in what ways. Second, disinformation science, as I envision, is about deep reflexivity, a keen attention to structural conditions that implicate each of us in different relations of domination and subordination. It is an orientation that emphasizes the importance of experience in theory building. It urges us to interrogate the here and now of exclusionary discourse, its globality as well as its troubling proximity to our own homes, its spectacular aberrations as well as its enfolding into the infraordinary and the banal. This effort, I think, will prepare us to hold space and make sense of the turbulences occurring on the campus, online worlds, and beyond, and develop a praxis of connection amongst struggles, voices, and different social support structures that are emerging today for the researcher communities. And it will also probably prepare us to stay alert about what is going on campus. There is a wonderful study by Adam Burston. He has shown that across 3 different universities in the US that he has studied, ethnographically explored, some of the actors who were very active in manosphere and also alt-right networks prior to joining the university bring those tactical repertoires, bring those contacts and ideological orientations to the campus, thereby radicalizing moderately conservative youth and student groups. And they do it sometimes not very intentionally. They just want to win some friends. But in the process, they bring what they have learned on social media into campus spaces. And therefore, the challenges are way too many. There are also, of course, many different opportunities. I'm tempted to close with a metaphor, which is a very weird metaphor, I would say. But those of us who have lived or stayed in the US, we get used to incinerator, which is a garbage disposal system. You just switch it on, you dump your garbage in the kitchen sink. Once you switch it on, it takes it in, it creates some noise, and then out it goes. And this incinerator is not available in German kitchens. Academic knowledge cannot be an incinerator. Just getting the garbage in, creating some noise, and taking the garbage out of our view. And this cycle repeats over and over again, creating some noise, but ultimately taking the garbage out of our view. We should call it garbage, and we should call it out. And this public orientation, I think, is important at a time when more and more garbage is coming our way, some of which our own creation. Thank you so much.
So, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much, Barbara and Christiane, for bringing us together and putting up this great lecture series. And of course, thank you very much, Sahana, for this excellent talk and the work you have done over the years on this important topic. The plan of the two here in front of me was to draw you in a conversation together with Sahana. So my plan is to put different heads on over the next 10 to 15 minutes. The head of a political scientist, the head of a researcher, the head of a citizen, and the head, when it comes to it, of a social media skeptic. We will see how it works, and I'm going to start with a political scientist. So I think it's appropriate to start the conversation where I was struck first with your work, also the talk, but the work you have done on shadow politics, not only in India, but also elsewhere. I think it's particularly important for us as political scientists, but also for the society at large. So in her work, as well as in the example of the trolling of an academic in Great Britain, it is clear that the participation of social media users, on the one hand, creates a wealth of data for contextual data of an individual's political, social, even personal preferences. A lot of people learn quite a bit from us through our use of media. On the other hand, of course, this learned media can be used by political operators. They can target us as social media users. They can manipulate us. They can create shadow texts and shadow messages to play the game of shadow politics. And of course, all of us are probably at least somewhat uncertain whether that takes place in Germany right now with the elections coming up. So my question as a political scientist is, are all societies or political systems similarly vulnerable to these shadow politics? Or did you find differences between the countries you compared, or even the states of India, between gender or age cohorts, where you would say, well, some people are especially vulnerable to shadow text and shadow politics, whereas others are not?
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you for engaging with the work, for your great questions, Sebastian. So my first answer to your question is that I'm not a political scientist, so my answer is going to come from a different disciplinary perspective and training. But all these segmentations are very important for political marketeers. So clearly, they are themselves mapping the vulnerabilities of different segments of population, and they design their campaign strategies accordingly. And during the talk, I used this term, persuadables. And that's the constituency, the people who are fence-sitters, who are undecided. But they could be persuaded with certain kinds of content. So on the one hand, there is segmentation, which is part of the political marketing plan. So it's one way to respond to your question. The other way, which I think is what you are asking, is whether there is a difference in terms of different social groups within a particular country and across countries. That's a research question. I would think that even within a country there are variations, and primarily because of digital access, and also the kinds of platforms that these different user groups are familiar with. For instance, WhatsApp is quite popular also among older generations, and political parties target them through this particular messaging service, more than others, for instance. And likewise, Instagram is for the younger crowd, but I hear that even youngsters are moving away. The Gen Z is moving away from certain platforms, and they're embracing Snapchat, for instance. So there are platform-based usage patterns that also leads to some differentiation. And across countries, I have not done a cross-country, cross-national study in the way political scientists do, but from all those different forays that we have gotten into, I could clearly see some synergies and common practices. That's why shadow politics, as I see in India, is exactly the same, of course with some distinctive features, as what we see in Brazil, for instance. Because there is also the global political consultancy space that uses the same tactics, same repertoire, same plan, and even same set of consultants who travel from one election scenario to another election scenario to offer their services. So that similarity and synergy, they come because of these shared tactics and consultancy space.
Second question refers to what decision makers and others ask me in my work on cyber incidents. Oftentimes they ask, when does cyber incidents overcome the threshold into the physical or analog world? And what struck me is that from your work, that one of your case studies is Kenya. And Kenya is a country where today femicides are a serious national security issue. And I wondered, when reading that, whether you could make a guesstimate wherever extreme speech crosses that line into physical violence. Do you have any idea why and how that line is crossed into the analog world? Which particular actors, which configurations of social media companies does do this work, and whether that is a common framework so that all societies over a certain period of time move across this violence line, or do they not?
I would say there is no common framework,
okay,
because we are talking about very particular configurations. There are certain tendencies and there are certain red flags, so to say, that you can easily identify. And because scholars have documented different incidents where social media conversations have contributed to. There is no causal link, and causal link is very hard to establish. So clearly we see that social media exchanges have contributed to the volatility of a particular circumstance, but within a particular situation, and followed by incidents of violence. So there are metrics available today to see if those red flags can be spotted. And one good framework is Dangerous Speech Framework by Sahana, where there are at least 5 different factors: the nature of the medium, the nature of the audience, historical conditions of people who are targeted, and also the content, of course, and how it is delivered. So all these different aspects, they contribute to the possibility of a certain speech act inciting violence. So we need to have that contextual knowledge to understand. But empirically, one can give several examples where WhatsApp rumors have contributed to mob lynching in the case of India, and also anti-minority attacks in Pakistan. Or in Brazil, how Bolsonaro supporters used WhatsApp to target vulnerable communities as voters. So there are empirical studies where encrypted messaging plays a very specific role. So,
okay. Let me put the researcher hat on, because we have something in common. We both use AI models to do our work. So one of the problems we faced when using AI models, modular AI models at different steps in our research process was that most of those models were trained in the United States and with particular data in that training session. So how can we as researchers, and you were involved in one of those fabulous projects Christiane talked about, called AI for Dignity, and maybe I should explain that to the audience, was funded by the European Research Council. It basically trains AI models for speech moderation, if I'm correct, in social media discourses, in collaboration with fact-checkers from both the Global South and the Global North. And from my own experience, I know it's very tough sometimes to bring social scientists, fact-checkers, together with AI people who can run the models. Even that is difficult. But if we try to find out when certain speech acts have crossed a line, how can we account for that the models we trained in the past really recognize the patterns we have on our minds when we talk about extreme speech, for example, or we talk about other problems like shadow politics? How can we account for that as Europeans? Because most of those models were trained and run in the United States, not to speak of Russian and Chinese model. So how shall we go about that problem?
Yeah, thank you. So there is this big push for value alignment in model building today. And how will this shape up? We do not really know, because corporate practices are beyond our reach when it comes to AI development. So as researchers, what do we have? We have different models. We can interact with the models and glean what they might be thinking and what they might be trained upon. In our project AI for Dignity, we had a different objective altogether. We wanted to see if existing models are able to detect hate speech or extreme speech. And the simple answer is it's very difficult. Because from the foundational problem of defining what is hate speech, all the way to the details of who the target groups are and what the expression should be. And also, there is the problem of shifting expressions. And earlier in the conversation, you were showing some symbols that mean differently in different countries, right? So clearly, on online media, they have their in-group idioms. They have indirect expressions, which are culturally coded, dog whistles. And it's difficult for a new human member that enters that community to understand it, leave alone AI models. So it's very hard for existing models to understand culturally coded extreme speech. That was our conclusion. But once we understand that, there are disparities even within that broader condition of incomprehensibility. And these disparities come precisely from language differences, from cultural differences. You mentioned how European data probably is not part of these model building, but clearly in our experiment, Perspective API was picking up well when it comes to German language expressions, but very interestingly, when they contained obvious expressions in English. For instance, usually they are hybrid expressions, right? Part of it will be in German language and part of it will be in English. So whenever there was an English, obviously hateful expression, like Black Lives Matter and shithole countries, etc., the model would give a very high score for toxicity, which means it was probably responding to those trigger words in the expressions, right? But when there were indirect exclusionary expressions. For instance, Germany is, the rest of the world is investing in different kinds of resources, and only Germany is investing in refugees. You know, some satirical, sarcastic expressions. The model was not able to pick it up as toxic. So clearly, these are some of the differences. So in terms of training data, in terms of value alignment, also in terms of how these different models are rolled out in different markets, I think there are major differences to be considered. And as researchers, we can track them to a certain extent.
Okay, let me shift the conversation a little bit towards the audience. So I now put my social media skeptic hat on, and that needs a little bit of elaboration, I fear. So social media is tempting because it empowers individuals to open up a discursive space. The more you participate, the more people hear you, the more empowered you feel. So it has an immediate pull to any individual that's in there, right? Most people think, you know, oh, it's for free. I can just join the community and say something there, and that's wonderful. But in earnest, I have to say, people pay with their privacy data. People pay with data on their preferences, political preferences, social, cultural preferences, sexual preferences, and whatnot. So a lot of people in those social media platforms earn a lot of money by getting this privacy data, and obviously political operators can earn quite a bit of money in manipulating and using that data. And thirdly, I think social media delimits the conversation across cultural lines, which may or may not be there. So instantly, you have a global conversation, if you will, depending on the social media. And therefore, my argument is this turbocharging of an individual also turbocharges the vulnerabilities that go along with this empowerment. You know, it's a very ambiguous social actions once you communicate with the globe in one instance. And I think what most social media users have not come to grips with is that this empowerment comes along with a lot of responsibilities. Because if you do not behave responsible, and I will not make those gestures you were referring to now, because later on this will be on YouTube, and people may go after me for putting up these gestures, of course, that goes along with quite a bit of responsibility. So you have to be trained as a social media users, and many people don't understand that. So what is your take? What should a social media user, being an academic, private citizen, a political activist, what should she or he, or anything between and beyond, have on her or his mind when using social media?
Mm-hmm. Right. I mean, vulnerability is an important point because it is also what Foucault calls the trap of visibility, right? You're exposing yourself at intervals and at a pace that you might not completely be comfortable with. And this social media trap of visibility and just-in-time commenting have done a lot of damages, I would say, even to academic thinking. But some academics have decided to insulate themselves from social media altogether by not being part of any social media channel. That's a stance one could take. But there are also different pressure points here. I hear from some young scholars that funders are expecting them to be promoting their work on certain social media channels. I stand corrected. I've not been under any pressure to do this. Yeah. But these are some of the vulnerabilities that are structural, that are in sync with what social media promises to offer you in terms of publicity, in terms of this individual control over what you can say, etc. All these myths have now been questioned. We have seen the reality, but that myth persists. And that's the myth that gets marketed by social media companies, right? At the same time, of course, one should understand that several of these movements have also gained tremendously from social media networks. Influencer culture, it has its challenging sides when it comes to different kinds of regressive thoughts that influencers have peddled, but at the same time, influencers have begun to earn a livelihood through TikTok videos, for instance. So this is really suffused with contradictions. So I don't have any advice to give as a practitioner of social media, because I'm myself, I think, hopeless when it comes to this. I would rather have long periods of uninterrupted writing with nobody talking to me. I mean, that's the dream of an academic. But today, you know, at the end of the day, you have to announce you're going to give this talk here. And on Twitter as well, you know, I have kind of, you know, frozen my activities. But what do we do? These are real dilemmas. And then you have to rebuild your entire network on a different platform, and another platform might get acquired by another really problematic figure. So what's the labor that we are actually putting ourselves into? The cynic in me says this is not worth it, right? So probably we can all boycott it collectively.
Well, I would say, as a political scientist, I could do it. As a media anthropologist, that's a different story. Maybe I could put up a last question as a private citizen. A short one? Okay. Short one. So there is, of course, the problem you have described in this example of trolling of an academic. It's there. How do I deal with the citizens about it? Actually, my position is I don't want my government to intervene in that debate or non-debate, in this hate speech, because once my government controls that conversation, I feel that the country I'm living in is no longer free. So I fear I have to fight these people by myself, and not having the state government fighting for me. That may be, for me, the right course of action, because I may be a privileged white man and an academic having the power to do so, and not many people may have that power. But then again, if we succumb to this idea that I'm a vulnerable person and only my government can protect me from having hate speech thrown at me, I probably wake up in a country I don't want to live anymore in. So how would you respond to that pretty extreme position? Probably?
It is an extreme position.
Yes. It's provocative.
Because it is provocative enough, definitely. The solution is not state regulation, which is unhindered, and the individual braving all different battles on online media with one's own resources and using different kinds of tactics. And that dichotomy does not exist in reality, of course. There are different actors here. But clearly, what we need are publicly accountable institutions. And Digital Services Act is a good example. There is also the option of trusted flaggers. They're called trusted flaggers. They've introduced a category there who can report to the platforms, and the platforms are obligated to take these reports on priority. So those are the sorts of accountability and responsiveness structures that you can build into platform governance.
Yes.
And definitely, state repression is a concern. I completely hear you on that, because we don't want the governments to be telling us how to behave online on online media, definitely. Because that's why we depart from hate speech discourse because of this misuse of the regulatory value that's presumed in hate speech. So we depart from that. We understand that there could be repression, but we have had models for mainstream media. It's not that we've not had models of regulation for mainstream media. So we don't have to reinvent the wheel all again. We need to adapt them. We have to enhance them, etc. But how do you bring this? That's the big challenge. We have global corporate giants sitting in a different country altogether, influencing elections in different other countries. WhatsApp influencing the elections in tiny little village in Africa or Pakistan or India or wherever, or in Bavarian village in Germany. How did this come about? How did these global giants are able to directly influence democratic processes today? And I think that is an issue. And as Christiana also mentioned, with the Meta's decision to discontinue fact-checking operations, we are in deep trouble, because there are so many different organizations that are also trapped in this philanthropic side of Facebook. They sustain because of Facebook money. So, and of course, we know that this free speech ideology is a cruel imposition to the rest of the world, where what you send on WhatsApp can have a real life and death outcome. So I think these are important issues to consider.
Thank you. Over to you, Christiane.
Yes, and especially when something like freedom of speech is opposed to what Zuckerberg calls censorship. Yeah, and when he starts talking about certain regulations of the social media, for instance, as producing not innovative policies, as in the case of Europe.